everybody. I'm Kevin, director of Mulago. This whole thing is really about a project we did at Mulago called Wisdom from Those Who've Been Here Before. We surveyed a bunch of people in our network about crises they'd been through before, asking them, what'd you do that worked? What'd you do that didn't work? And in retrospect, what do you wish you'd done? And the responses we got were wonderful. And we condensed what we learned from them down in a 3-pager that you got as part of the prep for this. And I just want to thank the people who contributed. I'm actually going to read them off because I don't want to forget anybody. I want to thank Alistair Harris, Andrew Yoon, Christine Sue, Chuck Slaughter, Anushka Ratnyake, Raj Punjabi, Ella Goodwin, Paul Skidmore, Reed Foz, Jim Taylor, Judah Pollock, John Arnhold, Russ Siegelman, Emily Bancroft, Ari Johnson, Willie Foote, and Peter Seligman, David Weekly, and finally Gustav Prekelt. I would just tell you, read the addendum. It's priceless stuff. It's 13 pages. It's worth digging through. And I want to thank you guys too, wherever you are out there. I'm amazed at who came, and I wish we could hear from all of you. I hate talking to a screen, so I've arranged a live audience. I've invited the head of a European foundation to shelter in place with me for a few months here. So thanks for the live audience. Let's just dive in. We want to hear from somebody in the trenches first. So we've asked Anushka to come talk to us. Anushka Ratnyake is a name really familiar to all you guys, I'm sure. She is the founder and CEO of Mulago, working to serve farmers in West Africa. Hey Anushka, how's the day at Dakar?
Things are good, Kevin. Thanks for having me.
So let's cut to the chase. How did all these crises leave you and Mulago thinking about money?
Yeah, it's a great question. We've gone through Ebola and terrorist attacks, the coup. I think in all those cases, money is the first thing that we have to think about after the safety and health of our team. What we started to do before was actually just really build out our fundraising team. We're really small, we're only 3 of us, but we focus heavily on outreach and cultivation so that every year we start our financial year with a healthy percentage of what we need for the following year. And then we also worked on building a reserve. So right now we have 3 months of operating reserve, which has just given us a bit of cushion given that this is really an unprecedented crisis. And in terms of this crisis right now, what we focused on is just making decisions as quickly as possible. So we reduced our global team by 15%, mostly in the US, so that we could protect jobs in Mali and Senegal. And then we built out a cash flow based on only committed funding and renewal funding, so that we could essentially keep our impact on track.
So we don't have to worry about you surviving. What are you doing to maintain your ability to serve the farmers?
Yeah, so we're pivoting like crazy. I told our team it's like we're doing 2 years of R&D in a matter of weeks. So we've transitioned our team to be able to work remotely, serve farmers. Delivery and planting begins in 2 months. And so we're really focused on making sure that we can serve 100,000 farmers this year and then maintain that impact through 2021. The other thing that we're doing, which is really important, is we do have a good cash flow that's in the black through June 2021, which I feel really fortunate. But there's some months that are really lean. And so what we would like to do is double our reserve. And so we're going to do that through a mix of a line of credit. We're talking to some impact investors to give us low interest loans, and then ideally raise the rest through grant funding. And so what we need in order to really feel comfortable to maintain our impact is going to be having a 6-month buffer as an operating reserve.
Are you hoping to bring new funders on board to do that?
I mean, that would be nice, but I don't know how realistic it is to get new funders on board right now. So we're talking to our existing funders to see if they could advance their commitment, if they've already made a commitment, or if they could add funding to our reserve. And a number of funders have stepped up to do that, and some are considering. And then, so we're really relying on the relationships that we have in order to maintain our impact.
Are you going to try to add new farmers this year?
So where we are in the season, we've already added a number of new farmers. We were at 60,000 last year. We've enrolled over 120,000 farmers this year. They've been paying, and they're 2 months away from receiving their seeds and fertilizer. And so what we want to do is make sure that we can continue to serve those 100,000 farmers that have already enrolled and have already paid. And we're on track to do that. I'm not worried about that. And it's just critically important. The UN has said that West Africa is very vulnerable to a food security crisis, and it's going to be much less expensive to make sure that farmers plant on time than to try and deal with delivering food and supplies if farmers don't plant.
And what do you think you're going to hit this year in terms of your old growth targets?
So our original target was 120,000, and we've downgraded that to somewhere between 90,000 and 100,000, just because the weekly markets have closed, and so farmers are struggling to earn money right now, because that's usually their income generation for the week. And so what we've done on our end is we've lowered our package prices by 10%. We've opened up new ways for farmers to pay, so they can pay through mobile money. And we're also advertising in cities so family members can pay for their family members back in the village. So we're hoping, like, with those changes, we'll reach 100,000 farmers this year. But again, this is really unprecedented. So we're taking it week by week and paying close attention to our numbers to see what's working.
Are you putting together any kind of specific response to COVID itself?
That's a great question. We're not a health organization, and we're leaving that to experts. So we've made sure that our team has training, that they have health kits and have support. But we are really focused just on the food security aspect, because it really is going to be the next big challenge 6 to 9 months from now. And so making sure that farmers can plant and that they have the resources they need to plant and the support is going to be critically important in the next 2 months. And so that's why we're really focused on maintaining our impact this year and next. And then we're having conversations right now with the Malian government to see what are their plans for food security for the country, and to see, given that we have a large distribution network and we're delivering inputs already, if they want to add inputs to that truck or food assistance, like we're willing to support their plans. And we'll be having those conversations with the Senegal government next week.
What are you thinking about in the back of your mind all the time about recapturing your hoped for trajectory?
Yeah, it's so important.
In the however distant future it is.
Yeah. So what we did a few weeks ago, when we realized that our old plan needs to be ripped up and kind of thrown out, was that our executive team and we made a new plan. So we focused on 8 key projects, and we've reorganized the entire organization, all 550 of us, along those key projects. And half of them are focused on the short term, so the next 4 months to get us through delivery and planting and all of the adjustments we need to make for COVID. But the other 4 are focused on long-term plans, so things that will help reduce our cost per farmer, things that will help us reach our North Star of reaching 1 million farmers by 2025. And that's really important, because it motivates the team and it creates clarity in the midst of all this chaos. What do I need to do? And how do I contribute to the organization? So it's become it's a driving force, and we check in on that plan every 2 weeks. I think the thing that I'm most excited about of that long-term plan is that right now we're piloting a partnership with the Mali government and the Ministry of Ag. And so that's something that it's part of a long-term vision of reaching 1 million farmers in the next 5 years together. And so that's something, if it goes really well, that sets us up for a lot of momentum once the world goes back to normal.
So give us the one piece of advice about leadership you'd want to leave us with?
Yeah, one piece is hard. That's like asking me to only do one limerick. I think
you can do a limerick if you want instead.
I'll give you two pieces of advice. So one is something I've learned the hard way is just communicate often, and share with people how transparent you're being. And then the other one is just be ruthless about prioritization for your team, for yourself, even if that means taking a break. Like our team has been working nonstop the last few weeks on all these pivots. And so our exec team and I, we decided that the number one thing we needed to do as an organization was recharge. And so we took a company-wide holiday this week just to rest. And so I think that's one of the best things you could do for your team is create a clear path and prioritize.
Man, that's some of the best advice we could ask for. Hey, thank you, Anushka. I'll let you get back to revolutionizing agriculture in Africa.
Thanks, Kevin.
Hey, so Anushka's conversation really captures a pattern we've started to see in a lot of our conversations, and it's almost a triage approach. Alex, if you'd show on the screen, I'll let you know what I'm talking about. So again and again, we're working through this very simple kind of algorithm with people of survive, maintain, respond. And I'll show you what I mean. First is survive, and it's about living to fight another day. If you're an early stage, especially organization with a scalable idea, the vast majority of your impact is in the future, and you've got to get there. So even if it means hunkering down, hibernating, until you can see the light of day and get back on track, you've got to survive. And the next thing is maintain. And as Anushka talked about, you've got to make sure that you continue to serve the people who count on you. And then maybe some more in the year ahead. And everybody's having to reduce their growth targets. But the first thing is to make sure that the people who trust and need you and you already have a relationship are going to be served, and then think about growth. And then finally, there's the notion of making a specific response to COVID. Now, some people, especially in health, they have an obligatory response that's really clear. And for others, it's going to be more opportunistic. But always, you've got to be thinking about how you're going to do all those three things with an eye toward recapturing your momentum over time. Go ahead, Alex. And so as you think about survive, maintain, respond, integrated into all of those, you're constantly thinking about how can I do whatever I'm doing now with an eye toward recapturing my momentum in the future. And so, next slide. We end up thinking about a lot about that last piece because we've been talking to so many organizations about COVID specific responses that we've tried to figure out, well, what does the optimal COVID response really look like? And so we ended up with, as we do, with a Venn diagram that kind of helps us think through it. So the first circle is to focus on doing things you're already good at. And what that means is it takes advantage of your core skill set, your comparative advantage, what you're really good at. Then it takes advantage of your particular ability and your particular special sauce as an organization. And then the next circle is taking on something that's high impact. And what that means is that it's something that you have as much evidence for as you possibly can. It's relevant to the COVID situation you find yourself in. It's highly leveraged, making the most of other institutions that you already know. And it's something where you have considerable reach. So good at, high impact. And the last, which really is focused on this notion of recapture, the last circle is what's its future value to you? And this is really important just in this theme of serving those you serve later in your path to impact at scale. And so what that really means is, what are the things that are going to enhance your reputation? Which obviously means you can't afford to blow it or fail in your COVID-specific response. You need to be visible without waving your own flag or bragging, but you need to be visible, obviously, because people need to know that you were there and you stepped up. You need to think about its value for fundraising. A lot of people are going to be looking to see what you did in this time. This is super important. What kind of relationships can you achieve or deepen in your response to COVID that'll serve you later when you need to pick up your momentum? What can you do that keeps engaged the people you really need to keep and makes really good use of them in this time? And then always, 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 how can this help you recapture momentum when the smoke clears? So we got somebody whose COVID response, we thought, beautifully captures this idea. Paul Skidmore is working on education in West Africa. He's the founder and CEO of Rising Academies, low-cost schools, some of the best in the world in Sierra Leone and now Ghana. And he's worked with the government in Liberia to help them with their schools through a really difficult time. Paul, I'm going to just jump right in here. What's Rising on air?
So the short answer is it's English and math instruction and behavior change over the radio and SMS, two kind of ubiquitous technologies in this part of the world. I guess the slightly longer answer is what we've tried to do is take something that's a really important part of our core academic model in the classroom, which is very, very detailed lesson guides for teachers, and redesign that in a way that can be delivered over the radio for 5 different age groups. And then put all of that content online so that governments and partner organizations in really any country can take that and make it part of their response, which so far about 10 countries have done.
So what is your time in Sierra Leone through Ebola, the crisis? How did that play into what you're doing now?
So we were a really different organization back then. We were really new and really tiny. And so the kind of operational challenges were really different and in some ways much simpler than they are for us now. Equally, our sort of capability to sort of respond was much smaller than it was then. I think the big thing that we took away was just observing the lack of kind of turnkey, off-the-shelf solutions in education for governments facing this kind of crisis. So in Sierra Leone, the solution when it came was quite late. It took several months for the government to kind of get something going. And it wasn't particularly high quality. It was a radio show like what we're trying to do now, but it was quite badly done. It was done sort of in-house with quite poor content. In particular, there was this one math teacher whose lessons literally constituted an hour of him reading out equations. And that was kind of how kids were supposed to learn math. And what was infuriating at the time was how little the sort of international community working on education there seemed to particularly care. And I actually got to the stage of like recording the lessons and trying to play it to people if they ever talked to me about this radio show. So when this crisis hit, my big message to the team and actually to a number of other organizations whose kind of work we really value was like, you've got to move fast to get your stuff in front of the right audience and show them what's out there so they don't try and reinvent the wheel and take ages doing it. And don't be too precious about your stuff. Like, yes, this isn't, you know, we're not educational broadcasters, but our kind of first draft or our first cut is going to be probably quite a lot better than what they come up with, and we can improve it. You know, we can get something out there and then we can improve it. So the most important thing is to be around the table. I think that that's something we've managed to do this time in a way that we weren't really able to do last time.
In some of our conversations, you talked about how you guys took advantage of some enforced downtime. And a lot of people are going to have some enforced downtime, and surprisingly, some extra bandwidth in a way they maybe didn't expect. How'd you guys use that?
Yeah, so like I said, we were very new, and there's no doubt that like it stopped us testing a whole bunch of things that were going to be important to sort of validating the model, particularly around sort of willingness to pay and things like that. But there was a whole load of stuff that we could still test out, particularly in terms of our actual academic model and the kind of gap between some of our assumptions going in about what like our teachers could do and the kind of very clever curriculum that we thought we were going to be able to implement and stuff like that. So we were still able to learn a ton of things that were really useful when kind of normal service resumed. And I think that's going to be true of this time too, that there's a whole load of stuff that we will test out in these very unusual circumstances that I think will end up being really useful. I think, for example, we'll end up being much better in how we engage parents after this experience than we were a few months ago.
Hey, give me your big takeaway on leadership in these times.
So for us, and again, I think partly it was when it happened, but for us, the big takeaway was around culture. Like the work of organizational culture building is definition, but I think it's often quite tempting to focus just on sort of what we are like and not enough on what or who we are unlike. And there was something about this sort of crisis situation that just generated these stories that had that kind of more dramatic sort of us and them, heroes and villains, good and bad sort of quality to them, in terms of sort of how our response and what we were proud of doing could be differentiated from what other people were doing. You know, we were stepping up when lots of others were stepping back. We were being nimble and adaptive when lots of other people were being rigid. We were being fast when they were being slow. And I think because they had that sort of simple sort of character to them, those stories have ended up having this incredible sort of durability and resonance, partly externally. Like it's really shocking to me, given how long ago it was and how relatively small a part it's been of our kind of impact story, how many people still think of us as like the people that did that education thing in Ebola. But more importantly, I think internally, like it was a really, and has remained a really important part of how we kind of induct people into the organization. And I'm, you know, one of the things I am really positive about in terms of this crisis is that I'm seeing those stories get refreshed with new examples and new sort of characters coming to the fore. And I think there's just something about crises that do that.
Yeah, you said that wonderfully poetic thing to me, that the stories they tell about you in these times will echo down the years. So thanks for that, Paul. I'll let you get back to filling the airwaves.
Thank you.
See ya. So there's one more person we really wanted you to meet today, and that's Reid Foss. And I wanted you to meet him for three big reasons. One is he's got huge experience relevant to us all. He's CEO of a $1 billion a year vision company, and he's steered other companies through really hard times. He's been the invaluable board chair of Vision Spring, and that's how I got to know him. And he's been on a zillion nonprofits. I'm pretty sure it's a zillion, and steering any number of those through innumerable hard times. And he also teaches the Mulago Fellows. The next reason is that he sent in a beautiful and pointed response to the survey, and it felt like it got there almost before I pressed send. And it really set the tone for a lot of what was to come. And the final reason is because Reid brings this wonderful enthusiasm to everything he does. And I don't know if he knows this, but he's kind of like our secret weapon in our fellows course, which is a pretty intense week. And as energy is flagging toward the end, we bring in Reid, because when you need a when you need a real infusion of energy, he's your guy. And with that, Reed, sorry about that intro, but I'm going to yield to you the floor, or whatever the Zoom equivalent is.
Kevin, thank you so much for those very flattering words. And when I listened to Anashuka and Paul, I sat there and thought, wow, they've been through Ebola, they've been through terrorist attacks, they've been through coups. This COVID thing isn't going to stop them. They've built up the scar tissue, and you could just hear in how they described it the strength that adversity has brought them. I submitted to the Mulago's request for some perspectives 24 days ago. I checked that today. 24 days is equal to a couple months in COVID time. I think every week in this COVID era is like 3 to 4 normal weeks in terms of the amount of new information that leaders have to process and how your perspective changes as to how this whole thing will unfold. 24 days ago, I said that we were in the top of the first inning. Hope all of you around the world are up to speed on the baseball image there, but I said we're at the top of the first inning. And I like the inning metaphor because in baseball with innings, you never quite know how they're going to last. And it's the same with COVID chapters. They are of different lengths. And oftentimes, you know, in baseball, sometimes you're at bat and you're more front-footed and offensive, and sometimes you're in the field and the other team is at bat. In this case, the COVID team, and they are more front-footed and you are more back-footed and defensive. I am not sure if we are in the bottom of the first inning or the top of the second inning right now. I have sort of decided though that the fourth and fifth innings are when people start to feel good about their hair again and feel like their hair is getting back to normal. That will be a key moment. But people talk about the new normal, but I don't think there's a new normal. There are just new chapters and innings, and what is normal for that chapter and inning. But we have to realize we're going to go through a lot of chapters and innings as we go through this. I do think should all assume that given how long it's going to take to discover and manufacture and distribute a cure, that COVID's going to be a factor in all of our behaviors and interactions in our organizations for at least a year. And I think during that time, sort of the weak organizations are going to die and everything's going to consolidate around the stronger organizations. One of the investors in my company said, you know, well-run organizations are likely to come through this well-run. Poorly run organizations will be exposed and will lose their supporters. During this inning, I think it's really important to concentrate our organizations on being conscious of our ways of working. Even in good times, organizations with a high level of self-consciousness and self-awareness are more effective. I've always thought heightened organization self-awareness yields heightened effectiveness, and your normal ways of working have been disrupted. Your team is feeling totally discombobulated. Your office team has lost its connective tissue. It's lost the mortar that bound the team together. I love the term collaboration through collision. That's where collaboration happens when you run into each other at the water cooler around each other's desk. There's so much vital information that gets exchanged there that is lost in where we are now and is forgotten by the proponents who are all remote work oriented. But your organization needs to look at its working protocols and needs to be consciously talking about how you're working at every given chapter. How we're working now is different than how my team is working 2 weeks ago, and you have to change your organizational work along with each new chapter. My core team starts every day with a 30-minute Zoom meeting where we say, what is it going to take to win the day? And then we end each day with another 30-minute meeting. Did we win the day? We start Monday morning. What's it going to take to win the week? We end on Friday. Did we win the week or not? This allows us to to recognize and celebrate successes on the way. Your successors are generally smaller at this point than they were before COVID, but you've got to celebrate those successes to get the organizational momentum, keep the morale high, keep everyone aware that you're progressing. I think during this chapter, sort of project management has to be much more intentional. I've always loved that buzzword, the racy buzzword, sort of who's responsible, who's got the R, who gets to approve, who's got the A, who do you have to consult, who's got the C, and who do you have to inform? And I find during this period where everything is so discombobulated, you've got to be saying, okay, you've got the R, you've got the A, you've got to be very clear, because it gets harder to do that. I also think teams right now get confused by their leaders' situational leadership. Of course, situational leadership is applying the right leadership and the right leadership tools for that particular moment, the situation in hand. 4 weeks ago, I bet all of the leaders on this call got much more hands-on. Even if they were great delegators before and hands-off and had great trust in their team, you just got to watch your cash more carefully. You've got to be on top of things in a way that you weren't. Your team is probably saying, what happened? I used to have that authority. I used to be able to make those decisions. They won't realize that you're dying to get back to the day where they can make those decisions again, but they have to be consciously aware that in this situation, you're going to have to lead differently, and they're going to have to manage their piece differently. Your organization has to talk about these things overtly. Set aside time saying, how are we working together now in this chapter? This is also a moment where organizations and individuals step up and just impress the heck out of you. Some people really shine. Some people are made for these moments. I've been loving watching the Vision Spring team Kevin, your Venn diagrams before are a great representation of what I've been watching in the Vision Spring leadership. They realized early on that their partners, people like BRAC or various aspects of the Indian government, or the various CSR corporate partners they work with like Shell in India, that those groups couldn't focus on glasses like we had got them focused on glasses before. They had to focus on COVID. So Vision Spring said, hey, we're going to repurpose our infrastructure temporarily to focus on COVID prevention, because that's what our partners are interested in now. Vision Spring said, we've got the expertise, a supply chain, a fantastic network, a motivated team. Let's use it for the problem at hand. And the board said, yes, temporarily pivot, because this is going to enhance our ability to accomplish our mission longer term about glasses. We'll come back to glasses, but having done that, we'll have a stronger team, stronger supply lines, and better partnerships who really believe we're there for them when they need us. Final point, I think in the innings we're in now, I think we're going to see a flourishing of generosity, a flourishing of generosity. I think in times like this, mature people come to realize that the only true source of fulfillment actually comes from helping others, those less fortunate, those who can do nothing to help you in return. My companies had to furlough a lot of people. Many of them are now volunteering for not-for-profits in the time they have till we can invite them back. And I've had to cut the incomes of most of the people in my organization. And yet in the midst of this, there have been a big increase in contributions to our Associate Relief Fund. This is a fund that associates in need can tap into. We're in the midst of raising hundreds of thousands of dollars, all from people whose incomes have been cut because the generous spirit has come out. I think we're going to see more and more of that right now. Make no mistake, this is hard. People like Paul and Ashoka and I, who have been through hard things before, have some scar tissue built up. If you're new to this, you're building the scar tissue. This will test everything you've got. It's hard now, it's going to be hard later, but amidst all of this, we're going to all be able to gain inspiration from the people who rise to these challenges, from the people who surprise us with their leadership, who surprise us with their empathy, with their maturity and their generosity, and we're going to see it all around us. That is what I have to share in this particular chapter of where we are.
Hey, thanks, Reed. I just want to assure everybody we're going to put Alex on sports metaphor translation duty. So he'll take all the baseball stuff and turn it into cricket and football equivalents. Reed, you're talking about a generosity bump right now. I don't know how long it's going to last, but I think it's going to end up sort of fading into a scarcity mindset over time. What do you think about that? Do you worry about that?
I believe this sort of moment can bring out the best in people. I actually think we humans, a tribal piece of us, is gathering together for shared sacrifice. And sort of cash may run low. I think people are going to find ways to rise to this as you know, what do they call the Depression and World War II generation the greatest generation of all? It's because they sacrificed for the good of all during that period. It was because they came together and worked together through the hard things. That's what I'm expecting this will be.
Well, I hope all you funders out there heard that. We are seeing a lot of funders sort of backing off and saying we're not gonna look at new stuff right now. And if you know anything about how this ecosystem works, you know that lots of people cycle off often for no apparent reason, and that new funders coming in are a critical part of the whole keeping the machinery going. So
but I'm hoping,
we
Kevin,
are really urging people to keep stepping up.
I'm hoping, though, that what you're seeing is they're backing off on new things so as to make sure they have enough dry powder to support the things that they've already started to nurture. That's what I'm hoping.
Well, we're seeing a real commitment to that. We're just worried mostly about new funders actually coming in, new funding coming in, new funders continuing the early conversations they've had and carrying them into funding, even though it's going to get scarier. Another thing, your early Hair on Fire email to me really talked about cash is king and really got me obsessed with cash. And if any of you haven't read it yet, the piece that Laura just did on sort of her quick and dirty guide on planning for this crisis, read it, because it really focuses in on the role cash is going to play in your survival and your ability to get going again.
It's everything, right? It's everything now. Yeah.
Hey, Reed, let me ask you, always talk to the fellows about boards in one way or another because you're our board guru. How should all these guys be using their boards?
Well, what I said 24 days ago was in my first communication to you is your boards are going to be too busy right now. They cannot talk to you. I feel very differently now, and I'm finding that the not-for-profit boards I'm involved in are now getting engaged and investing time and coming back. So where I was saying 24 days ago, I'd hang back, I'd now lean in and pull them in and make sure they're full partners in the decision making that you have and the game plan that you have. But now is the time to really enroll them and make sure that they're with you and on your side, and to tap into them for perspective and advice, as I've said in the seminars in Bolinas. Boards want to feel useful. They want to feel like they're contributing to the greater good. So I believe now is in this chapter, this inning is the time to enroll them further and make sure they're well engaged. I've challenged Vision Spring to communicate ever more to us right now.
Well, this just occurred to me. Is there anything you shouldn't expect from your board?
I think you're saying to them, we need you more than ever. I think they'll feel needed, wanted, that we're like every group, this is going to be stressful, and that we intend to come through this stronger. But I think tapping into them ever more. And I don't know, I don't think there's any, I mean, I think you can keep asking for money in the same way you had before, but mostly ideas and expertise, and rally them to your cause. I think it's the same things you wanted from them in the past.
You know, this just occurred to me. We work with a lot of really early stage organizations who haven't really built a board, and a few who maybe haven't thought about it as much as they wish they had. Do you think you can find new board members in a time like this?
There's always the right person out there. There is always the right person out there. So yes, I do think that, and right, because again, I think you're tapping into this generosity impulse that I think bad times are going to bring out in people. Yeah, I'd say for sure. And it's been fun for me to watch as I've been sort of visiting you all out in Bolinas for the past few years and talking about boards. It's been fun for me to watch. I paid a particular attention to the Earth Enable board and how they've been kicked off and progressed, and I've been really heartened to see that. Yeah, it's too bad if you didn't sort of start to build those structures and that governance early on. And again, a lot of the groups like the Draper Richards Kaplan Foundation, I love what they do in terms of sort of really getting, helping their groups put together boards that are sort of often well above their weight class. And I think that's a really important thing to do early on. And there's no time like the present to start if you have not done that. But I would say keep nurturing your board and keep them on your side and keep them involved and engaged and utilized.
Hey, I'm totally springing something on you here, which is, as somebody I would want to have at the helm of any storm I had to go through, have you ever blown it?
So I was running an organization, an early stage company during right after the internet bubble. It was a European company that I was running, and we were very close to bankruptcy, to the point that literally we had to consult a bankruptcy lawyer every day to get permission to continue to run for another 24 hours. And we had to do that daily for about 3 weeks. It was very hard and very stressful. But no, my advice, if you were going to ask me that leadership thing, I wrote down a few things, but one was, do not regard failure as an option. Do not regard it as an option. That the whole Silicon Valley thing of, oh, failure is good, to me, that's because venture capitalists know that they're going to shut down 8 of 10 investments that they make, and they want to make it softer for the people they're going to shut down. Don't regard it as an option. I find a number of folks right now are going back and reading a lot of Churchill during the Blitz, when any sane person would have allowed failure to be an option. But no, Western civilization survived because he would not allow that to be an option. Don't let that sort of conversation creep in. Do not let that be a thought in your head. I was scared out of my mind during that period where I thought we'd go bankrupt in a loud and public manner back in year 2000. Scared out of my mind. It was hard to drag myself out of bed every day. That was really hard. Interestingly, I was with a group of senior execs. You know, we're all finding our networks of people outside of our organization to tap into. I was with a group of business leaders who were between the age of sort of 45 and 55, and I said to them, is this the hardest thing you've ever? I said to them, what is the hardest thing you've had to manage before this? And then, is this harder than that? And all of them said, oh no, that was harder than this. When I heard Anashuka talk about, again, the terrorist attacks and the Ebola and the coups, I'm thinking, that sounds really hard to me. I've not had to do that. That is really hard. And quite honestly, if you guys were looking for like easy jobs, you didn't choose them. You chose hard things already. All right. I love, there's a line in The Godfather where the Godfather says, This is the business we chose. This is the life we all chose. We chose to do this. We chose we're going to do hard, important, good things together. Failure's not an option when you're trying to do that. You chose a hard road. This is just going to make it harder. You'll rise to it. It will make you stronger. I've got my picture back there of FDR. I like to keep it there to remind people on my calls of his attitude on all this. And I loved what he said. And said, nothing great was ever accomplished without enthusiasm, right? That's your job, is to be the light, in this darkness, and to bring the enthusiasm to keep this alive and to keep your organizations accomplishing the mission you set out for and that Mulago founded and that we're all rooting for you to be successful at.
Wow. Well, now that we've gone full Churchill, Godfather, FDR, I think it's time to get some hear what the audience wants to talk about. Hey, Kristen, are you there?
I'm here.
So Kristen has volunteered to curate and moderate the questions. So I assume you got some.
We're ready. We have some.
All right.
There's a lot of questions about what Reed had for breakfast, and if we can all have some of that. But then one of the things we heard from everyone was about over communicating. You should over communicate. You should communicate ever more. We have a question from Salva Dutt at Water in South Sudan saying, is it possible to actually over communicate?
No. The answer is no. When you think you're over communicating, your organization does not believe you, that you will never be able to accomplish over communication. You think you've said it 1,000 times. They still don't get it. A key part of your job is repeating the same thing over and over and over again with enthusiasm. That is one of the underestimated aspects of leadership.
Great. Kevin,
can I?
Yeah.
Well, Anushka, what do you think of that?
Yeah, I know, I totally agree. You have to over communicate. Your entire leadership team will feel like they're repeating themselves all day long, but that's what the team needs. Like, they need the connection of what they're doing and how that works with the mission, or how that connects to your new plan, why it's going to make sure that you're successful. You just really need to communicate. I actually told that to our exec team yesterday. Like, our job is to communicate. It's not a secondary job. We have to communicate, and that's a core piece of what we need to do to help our teams stay focused. And
how do you think about the difference between how often you need to communicate to your team versus your funders?
Yeah, so for funders, well, I asked them. They said about once a month, and so that was good. That was a good guideline, and so that's what we're going to go for, is once a month, a quick note, few bullet points about here's what we're doing, here's our stats from our program, and then here's something long term. So something short, because everyone's inboxes are getting inundated.
Kevin, do you want to comment on that?
Inboxes getting inundated. Yeah, there's such a thing as reporting to your funders too often. So really curate that, make that short and to the point. You do want to let them know that you're out there and that you're doing something smart, and the shorter it is and the more pointed it is, the more better written it is, the more likely it's going to get read.
So I think is Laura Hattendorf on the line? Yes. Everyone from Mulago knows Laura. Laura, can you hear us? Maybe not.
She's still muted.
Sorry, there we go.
There you go. We're getting a few questions that I think are really relevant to the piece that you put about quick and dirty response. So we have a question from Ilom Alavi at M FarmPay in Ghana, asking about, is now the moment to think about staff reduction or reducing salaries? We have another question from Priya Agrawal in India saying, if you have enough cash to get you through the next few months, how do you think about fundraising and going to your donors? Won't they just say, don't ask for more? Do you want to comment on how to think about cash and planning right now?
Sure. So cash is, I mean, as the piece says, cash is king. If you have, let's talk about first salaries and how to think about that. So salaries, people are usually your #1 expense, cash expense every month. And I think you do need you need to manage within the bounds of your current cash projections. And so if that means payroll reductions or furloughing, you absolutely need to do that, and you should do it sooner rather than later. How you do that really depends a lot on the cash shortfall, depends a lot on the culture of your organization, who your key people are and what their other options are. So there's a lot of different aspects that go into thinking about that. And Reed, I would suggest that this is something that you should tap into a couple board members and really think hard about. You know, how do you shrink your payroll in the most responsible way? So I can't tell you exactly how to do it, but you absolutely need to shrink your payroll at this time, especially if you don't have the cash to get you through. If you have cash for a few months, it's going to be hard. I think you're in survival mode. You need to rethink that whole cash projection, and you need to shrink your expenses so that you can make that cash last a lot longer than a few months. A lot longer. You are in you need to get through the next 9 to 12 months to survive, to live another day. And that means really reducing your cash expenses right now. New funders are going to be very difficult. Raises are going to be very difficult. So yeah, you should go back to your existing funders. I think that's your most likely shot at raising some additional funds.
When I first got involved with social enterprises, I was appalled that many of them only had 3 months of survival. And I said in a board meeting, what are we doing here? And they said, this is not uncommon. I said, well, it's going to start to be uncommon for us, because that is just not acceptable. That is not how we are going to live. And we dug out of that over years. But your funders should not think several months is good.
Great. Kevin, there's a really important question from our friend Julius at Lawala in Kenya. He says, many of us are actually working in health. So this is a bit of a different situation for us. We can't pause. How should we think about what we should be doing?
Well, when we think about health organizations, the reason we didn't have a health organization on here is because a couple of people who we really wanted to have on are actually doing some healthcare right now. And healthcare is it's interesting because we wanted Anushka to talk a little bit about why the food supply is such a key part of responding in the time of COVID. But the health responses are obviously more straightforward. It's like everybody in our health organizations really knows exactly what they need to be doing. And so they really have typified for us this idea that after surviving, your commitment is to the people you serve, to not let down the people you serve, to stay in place for the people you serve, and to step up what you can offer the people you serve. And it's been extraordinary watching these organizations focus in on maintain, and everything they do ends up being a COVID specific response. And the thing that I've also heard from them is something that a lot of people really don't understand in times like Ebola and COVID, is that the other diseases are still there. And if you don't keep those services going that you were providing before this right in the forefront, you could end up with far more mortality and morbidity from the neglect of other diseases than you ever are going to see with COVID. So I've been really proud to see people step up and make sure that there's no dip in the services that they provide for the people they serve.
So I think that's a good transition into a question about impact. So organizations are thinking about how to maintain it, and a lot of organizations are trying something new and doing all the pivots we've talked about. So how should organizations think about impact when they don't quite know if what they're doing works, because it's different than what they usually do? What is impact measurements that's simple enough to do and rigor enough to mean something in a crisis?
One thing we're telling people, if you're going to do something new, it needs to have a theory of change. And if this concept we have of a behavior map is who's supposed to do what differently, all the way to the impact you're hoping to create with your COVID response, is still a really good exercise. And some of the things people have taken on already have an evidence base. So you can, if you do them, you can have some real confidence they have impact. But at the very least, you need to have a theory of change for your COVID specific intervention. So Paul's going to be needing to figure out what it means for a kid to really learn the radio. How long do they need to learn that matters? How do they need to learn? How do they need to listen? And how does he stay in touch with some portion of his audience so he gets an ongoing feel for just what that is? And so you're kind of making it up as you go along, but you got to have a theory of change, and you got to think about how can I reach out into that chain of behaviors all the way to the impact I'm trying to create, and touch those points and see if I can satisfy myself that the people are doing what they need to do all the way to impact.
So we have actually a lot more questions that hopefully people can stick around for the after party if they want to share. We can talk more about it, but for now we just have 2 minutes left. Is there anything, Kevin, you want to say and close?
I'm just going to reiterate some stuff. And probably won't even take 2 minutes. Survive, maintain, respond, recapture is really working for us as we think through with organizations time and time again. And survive is super important. Your impact is in the future. You've got to get through this. Don't be distracted right now by what you may feel would be nice, what you may feel even obligated to do. Your job is first and foremost to survive, to serve the people in the future, and your path to scale where your real impact jackpot is. And the next thing to think about, though, is maintain your services to those you already serve. They trust you, they need you, they count on you. And grow your impact if you can, but make sure you serve the people who already trust you, and maintain that trust, because that's going to be so important in picking up the pieces and moving on. Respond if you have to, but make it really use your strengths. Don't do stuff you're not good at. Don't fail at anything. And think about how your response makes you emerge stronger and really ready to pick up the pieces and run when the smoke clears. I hear again and again from the good leaders, take care of your people. And what really moved me in a lot of the responses we got was take care of those most vulnerable. And we talk a lot about making cuts, and we got to make cuts. But all the best leaders again and again emphasize that you're making cuts across the board, but your lowest paid employees are the ones who are already on the edge and already the most vulnerable. And we've heard some really inspiring stories about how people are taking care of them. And finally, take care of yourself. This is, you're in it for the long haul here. Do the things that really work for you. Get enough sleep. And that's been a big theme in a lot of my office hours calls. Get enough sleep, get the exercise you need, spend your time with your loved ones virtually if you have to. Make that, if that isn't a luxury, it's really a responsibility going forward. So with that, I just want to say thanks a lot for coming, everybody, and go off and save the world.